we are thinking about informal digital learning. So that's your moment to go, I am in the right place this morning. So what is informal digital learning? It can often feel like this sort of catch-all phrase, one that spreads across defined audiences, like families, and it sort of gets the everyone else, what we call the general public, as if that is one audience. Across the cultural sector, informal digital learning is often barrier breaking. It's crossing geographical borders and time zones, and it has the chance of being disruptive, even provocative, when employed in physical spaces. But I think it's really important to say at this point that informal digital learning is not aimless. It is inspiration seeking. It's open. It gives us a chance to connect. It can be very, very social and collaborative. It can equally be very reflective and thought-provoking. For me, informal digital learning really challenges the heart of what learning means and what it takes for something to be a learning experience. As we understand how informal digital learning challenges and competes with leisure activities, we can work to understand how learning for the sake of learning actually offers us all great freedom. And what we've all picked up as professionals, as students, as volunteers over the last few years is how those blurred lines of digital and physical continue to drive forward these experiences. So the future of informal digital learning is continually being explored. It's an experimentation into how the learner looks to digital creatively and full of curiosity. And it's intriguing, to say the least. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our 4 wonderful informal digital learning panelists today, who will all give you a wave as I say their names and a little bit about them. Firstly, we have John Whall, who is the Participation and Outreach Leader for MBD, which is a UK-based arts organisation that specialises in telling stories using immersive technology. So his work explores participation via cooperative and co-creative practices. He is involved with the Digital for Engaged Visual Arts and a digital champion for the East Midlands Participatory Arts Forum, which is a bit of a mouthful, John. He's recently exploring the digital aesthetic of community art, so lots of interesting things that I'm sure we're going to hear about later today. Joining us from Norway, we have Dimitra Christidou, who is the Senior Curator for Education at the National Museum of Art, Architecture and Design, which opened its doors to the public in June last year. With a museum background and a focus on creating digital content, she can talk to what some of her colleagues have been doing to design over 80 digital interpretive resources for a new permanent exhibition. Next, we are joined by Ben Gammon, who is a consultant focused on audience research and interpretation in relation to digital content. He brings over 30 years of experience into the museum and heritage sector and has contributed to over 100 digital media learning exhibits. And so the challenge is to see whether we can list all 100. We might play that game later. And last but by no means least, we have Paterson, who is the Community Engagement Manager at Westminster Abbey. He is a key contributor to the Abbey's digital offer for families and an advocate for learning new digital skills through trial and error. And he's also a working group member of the Families in Museum Network, which is a UK-based network. Amazing. So I can see people are still trickling in. A hello and a welcome. You're going to get to know our panelists very quickly, and the first thing we're going to do is get our panelists just to give you a proper little hello, and I'm going to ask the first question, which is, how do you define digital learning in your role? And let's start with John.
Wow, well, thank you for the introduction there, Sean. So, as Sean said, my name's John Whall. I'm the Participation and Outreach Lead at Metro Boulot Dodo. I'm also a freelance artist and consultant. How do I define informal learning in my role? I think because our program at MBD is quite young, we have a lot of experience with educational workshops and programs, but we're defining our own program is in its infancy. So we're doing a lot of consultation and collaboration with audiences, especially with young people. We're doing a lot of work consulting with communities with additional needs. So at the moment, we're trying to define our program by our community needs and where the interests are.
Amazing, thank you for that. Ben, the same question to you of how do you define digital learning in your role?
Thank you. Most of what I've done over the last 30 odd years has been developing digital exhibits that are on site in museum exhibitions. So as you said in the introduction, I've worked on and helped to develop around about 100 digital interactive exhibits over those years, and also evaluated visitors' use of and response to many different ones. Most of those have been game-based experiences, educational game-based exhibits, but also things like digital labels and film-based exhibits. So for me, digital informal learning is really about how you can use digital media to enrich and enhance people's museum, art gallery, and heritage site experience.
Amazing. And same question to you, Aaron. How do you define digital learning in your role?
Hi, so as you said, Sean, I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Westminster Abbey, and we have been sort of dipping our toe into digital for a few years now, and it is probably because of that banned word that we started to really do that within the Families and Communities programme. But we had begun thinking about it before that, luckily. So we had some ideas because we have a digital learning manager at Westminster Abbey. So what we've mostly been doing is delivering interactive sessions online, so through platforms like Zoom and Teams. And we produce video content that is held on our Abbey at Home page on our website. And we're still really trying to find an equilibrium, basically, between what we do on site and what we do online, and to try and ensure that what we're not doing is creating two separate programs, but that those programs work together. The other thing that I should have mentioned when I gave you my bio, Shan, is that I'm also one half of a video production company where we do a lot of creating videos for the cultural sector, which I think I probably left out because it makes me sound like an expert, and I am definitely that person who Shan was mentioning at the beginning is not an expert. I'm very much learning as I go.
Amazing, thank you, Aaron. And finally, Dimitra, that same question for you. How do you define digital learning in your role?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I have to clarify a few things before I go to the definition. It's a bit, I would say, interesting the way we work at the National Museum of Art, Architecture and Design. It's the first time I work like this, so I think it's not everybody takes it for granted. I belong to the Department of Education and Visitor Experience, so we are a lot of people working there. So it's very exciting to hear Aaron being 1.5 part of a team. I used to work in smaller teams, but this team is a big team, and we work with different people with different backgrounds, all working with learning, and that is a kind of like interesting constitution of people that are divided in different teams, and these teams have different interest and focus areas. So to them, representing the digital team, maybe I would say not the digital teams because it sounds like IT, but it's like a team for digital learning at the museum. So we have 5 people who work there with different backgrounds, and that makes it a very interesting also as a case study, because everybody has different backgrounds and different interests. At the same time, we work at the very big museum that opened its doors, as you said, a year ago, and that was a challenging process for us, exciting also. So we have been influenced a lot by the agenda, the mission, the strategy that the museum has. Everything has to be in line, because we all gonna fall apart if we're not aligned, and that affects the way we define digital learning at the museum. So despite having several definitions out there in the world and in the literature about what digital learning is, we had to sit down in the team, discuss it like for a lot of hours. I actually had a workshop for like 2.5 days discussing the definition. And we found out that fits our purpose and the ways we see we tackle learning at the National Museum. in line with the strategy and mission would be that we use digital learning on site and online to curate, but also bring to life art, design, and architecture, which is a very interesting combination of three things, through audiovisual tools. And that, what is very important for us when it comes to digital learning, that we work in teams, and it's multidisciplinary collaboration. So nobody stands alone. Everyone in the team affects the final result, or the way we look at what digital learning is. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, it took a bit of more time. Apologies.
No, that we have got time this morning, and I know that's the thing of hearing, actually, even just from that, what feels like a simple starting question, actually, the diversity of what's going on with digital learning. People in at conference, in the chat, you might want to share what digital learning feels like to you. I know we've got such a variety of people here today. I think some of us, that idea of a multidisciplinary world, Dimitra, sounds incredible. I know we'll have a lot of people here at conference that feel like, I'm on my own, or it's even just a tiny part of what I do. And so I think it's really good for us all to understand that variety of what's going on. So as conference are dropping their thoughts on that into the chat, I'm going to ask the question, which is not the pandemic question, but it sort of is. And I think it just gives our audience a bit more background to some of the projects and the programs that you've all been working on. So my question specifically is, how have you, in your roles, in your organisations, reacted to changes in digital learning over the last 5 years? Aaron, you started to allude to that, so I'll come to you first on how things have changed at Westminster Abbey.
So yeah, at the Abbey, I was the only person who was working on family and community engagement and learning. And then we hired a new person in, I like to think, because I'd done such a good job before that. And on her very first day was the day we went into lockdown. And so there was a lot of, I'm not going to say panic, but there was a lot of energy around deciding how we could fill that gap. And what we decided was that we would just, as closely as possible, replicate our on-site program online. And that meant we went through a hugely steep learning curve. And like I say, I have had this background with a media company, but in that media company, I am not the technical person. So there was a lot of technical challenges. And basically, we just had to jump in both feet first and sort of find out, how do you share a Zoom meeting, which who'd even heard of Zoom, through Facebook so that people can watch it live at the same time as you're delivering it. And then we started to pre-record elements of our online delivery. And from that, we started to produce videos that went onto YouTube. And what I found within my role at the Abbey to be sort of the most successful was when I could discover very low-tech solutions to problems, because I guess part of my brain was thinking, well, the high-tech solution is to do this and to engage that, but we didn't have the budget to do that. And I personally didn't have the technical skills to do that in my role at the Abbey. So there was a lot of juggling, and through that, we sort of would learn something very, very quickly, and then we'd have to forget that because we would just learn that that wasn't the right thing to do, and we'd have to, and that would be like delivering on Facebook, which we did once, and then we would learn how to produce videos that were very, very cheap, but engaging, and sort of always trying to measure what is the length of time that someone wants to watch a video for. So basically, there was a lot of trial and error over that period, over these past 5 years. And I guess before the P word, I had been engaged in developing with our visitor experience team the multimedia guide that our team hand out to all of our visitors. And we have a families section of that. But actually, I was very quickly sidelined because my ideas were challenging to the company who were hired in to produce that. And they wanted to do very, very specific things that I felt weren't the right things. And so now we do have this multimedia guide that is brilliant in many ways, but also has children very focused on a screen as they're in the Abbey. So our next stage is thinking about how do we use digital on site that encourages people to engage with the building rather than to focus on a screen.
Brilliant, thank you, Aaron. I think that's such a common issue going on in lots of different heritage and cultural organisations around the world as we come out of, I'm just going to say the word pandemic, I'm getting rid of my own rule, as we come out of the pandemic and we have, as humans, this really interesting relationship with technology. We had to use technology, it very much became a necessity, and then it became the thing that we wanted to be nowhere near because we were fed up of it and we wanted to go back to hugging people. And now we're sort of in this world where we're still establishing, what does that mean? When do I do things? Is it as clear cut as we often think about when we move between the physical and the digital? Something I talk about quite a lot, so I will stop talking and let my panelists say more on that. John, why don't you give us your thoughts on sort of how things have changed over the last 5 years for you?
I think it's really interesting because we instantly go to the pandemic when we think about the last 5 years, but actually it's only really been the last 3 years. And I think the 2 years leading up to it, we kind of were seeing the acceptance point, especially within arts and culture, of what digital was. Digital has been kind of at the forefront and been pushed by, say, organisations like Arts Council for a good decade now. And it was only around 5 years ago that people started getting it, people started understanding, audiences were responding to it. And there was such an emphasis on the physical. Especially in informal learning, especially where you're working with older participants or participant groups that were parent-child. I worked on projects where we introduced 3D printing to a parent and under fives group. And the majority of those who were attending that group were mums. We did occasionally have a few dads, but it was mums. And they were really excited to see a 3D printer and what that was producing from drawings to 3D models to printing, and they were coming back. They wanted to do more and more of it. So that kind of idea of the physical side of digital, we talk about a lot about hybrid delivery, and hybrid does include the physical. I think sometimes we forget that physical spaces that have digital elements are hybrid, especially when you're introducing elements of immersion. But I think the jump to online, and we were really quick to jump online. And there were certainly organizations, my previous role, where we had a lot of content online anyway. Again, this emphasis on digital and pushing digital media. But it really, the online, I think when pandemic happened, became more considered, really kind of investigating what's working, what our audience is responding to, how do we keep this going? Because we didn't know how long we would be in this situation. But I think because of the rise in things like Web3 and the metaverse and the Oculus Quest, or now the Meta Quest 2 headset, becoming so readily available, that idea of using online as an immersive experience, even through a screen, whether it's an online exhibition or a social experience, became something that was more, like I said, considered. I worked on oddly, it launches today, this year's Format International Photography Festival launches today, but the one that we had during lockdown, there was an emphasis on the social experience. We used a multi-user space to exhibit this 20-room exhibition, but the emphasis was people being in those spaces at the same time and they could communicate, which was fantastic. And I think now we're seeing that return back to the physical. And especially when it comes to piquing people's interest with immersive spaces. Obviously, the work that we do at MBD is focusing on immersive technologies and storytelling, but people don't necessarily have the access to the physical equipment, the computers, the headsets, the software in some respects, because they have a laptop, but their computers don't run it. So we're seeing a great interest in that coming into our space, which is a studio, not a venue. And users wanting to learn how to make these experiences and how to kind of navigate three-dimensional space because they've been stuck in a two-dimensional space for so long.
100%. And I think it's that real audience focus, isn't it, that I'm really hearing from you, John, and that idea of being led by what our audiences need and how that is shifting. And actually, we should be very conscious of that shift is continual. It isn't just pre-pandemic, pandemic, post-pandemic. We will continue to see changes. And I'm sure, Ben, you can bring us up on that as well as things that have changed in the last 5 years and in that contrast to your longer experience in the sector.
Yes, I guess it's a story of two halves, really. Pre-pandemic, there was in the world I am in, which is development of physical interactives on the floor of exhibitions, there was a gradual change away from traditional touchscreen exhibits. The scale of the screens, the number of screens were increasing, and there was increasing use of quote unquote innovative physical interfaces, so interfaces which didn't use the traditional touchscreen. And that was a sort of slow evolutionary change that was occurring during those pre-pandemic years. Interestingly, in terms of myself, when it came to the pandemic, I was in the middle of a major exhibition project where I was head of content in that role. And we had to switch the entire exhibition development process to online. And I wouldn't have believed it possible to develop a multi-million-pound exhibition entirely through Zoom and team meetings, but it did prove to be possible to do that, with one exception. And the one exception was it proved to be impossible to do good quality prototype testing of interactive exhibits. We did some testing online of digital media exhibits, and it yielded a little bit of useful information. But what became apparent was if you're not in the room with people while they are using the exhibits, you lose most of the most important information that you need to get. So it's with great relief that we are now back in physical spaces, and I can see people and talk to people while they are using digital equipment, because this is really important. Just before lockdown, we managed to do some prototype testing of one of the exhibits, which had a very unusual physical interface. And all of the issues that we had to resolve with that exhibit focused around how people physically handled that interface. None of that would have been possible to do online. So it's not that there aren't advantages to doing things online, not that there aren't great potential to it, but I would also urge people not to forget the great value of the real and the physical and being in the present. And I would hope that we don't lose sight of that value, and we don't lose sight of the lessons that we learned from being there with people while they use these digital learning experiences.
I think that's such an important point, Ben, and something that I think a lot of us feel when working on digital in the heritage and cultural sectors and wherever else you're from today, joining us thinking about this. And actually, it's this idea that it doesn't have to be either or, and actually that hybrid is a thing that we think about for audiences, but we should also think about as staff, as volunteers, as ways of working. This has that impact going on. Dimitra, let me come to you with that same question of, how have you reacted to changes to digital learning over the last 5 years?
It's very hard to be the last person talking because everybody has, I have so many notes around me. Everybody has made a comment or more that are very valid to what I would like to say. Also, I see there are many texts and comments in the text box, and I would say that I agree to most of them, maybe all of them. So there is a lot of things going on here when you throw the question of how do we react to the changes in the digital field or learning in general that happened the last 5 years. It's very interesting that we all come from different parts of the world. And in Norway, I would say, thankfully, the situation has not been so dreadful as it has been in other countries. So Corona restrictions for us are not the same as probably were for you guys or for other part of the world. So I remember at the start of the pandemic, when the word COVID was not very often used and was not part of a vocabulary, maybe it was like early February 2020, I was collecting data. As Ben says, I was using an iPad to collect data. And I remember one of the visitors says, have you cleaned that screen? And I said, but why? And then says, there is a pandemic going on. And I was like, oh, okay. And then it was the first time I used antibacterial to clean the screen. And then, all that thing happened, and we had to adjust and go back to where we find comfort and safety and reflect about what we've done. The interesting thing here is that we had a building, but it was closed to the public. So we opened only in June 2022. So we, as part of the agenda, as I said, and strategy and mission of the museum, and in relation to one of the comments, inclusion and accessibility is a big thing. And we still work a lot with this, although I get a lot of questions, is this like, do we have really to do that? So still, we stream our events at the museum, or we try at least to stream the majority of the events on YouTube or other social media. We have most of the time 3D models of the exhibitions available online. And that is because we really, really believe that a person who lives in North Norway needs a lot of money to come to Oslo. So we want to be a museum for everybody and each one that lives in Norway, first of all, because we are the national museum, but also for international guests. We have digital tours curated by us. So there's a lot of things going on online when the physical is either restricted or open to the public, but restricted for other reasons. But also we as practitioners, I would say that although the museum was closed for the last years, it was like an interesting time, and still is, because you need time to read, to keep in touch with what's happening. You need time to discuss with your colleagues, to identify needs, to go to the field and test things, like Ben said. So there's a lot of things going on, even though there is no much movement or hugs around the world. Like, it seems it's stable, the world, but it hasn't been, because everybody used their time in different ways. And I think the teamwork that we have at the museum works very beneficially when it comes to that, because everybody shares information. So sharing information is very beneficial for keeping in track with the changes that happen in the field. We see what other peoples do. So we often go on tours and visit other cultural institutions to find out how they work. We do evaluation, as Ben also said. We're going to conferences like today and hear what other people in different places do. A lot of reading, a lot of reflection, a lot of writing and rewriting. So there's a lot of things going on, both on-site and online. But when it comes to on-site exhibits that we had, it's a long-term process. So although the museum opened in 2022, I have trouble remembering we're in 2023, I'm sorry. It's a long-term process that started early on in 2016. There's a lot of things in the field that have changed the past years. And some could say that most of the things we have at the museum when it comes to digital are a bit traditional. And I take that criticism. I guess everybody takes that criticism. But we had the chance to do tests with people on site. And that is a valuable resource in being better. And as you said, when you opened that conference today, we may know a lot, but we don't know everything. And I think that is the starting point for moving forward. And there I stop. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for that. So really, this first bit this morning, we're thinking about the inception and the design of digital learning, I think, and we will spend time later thinking about more of the delivery and evaluation. I hear evaluation is already coming up, and obviously evaluation is front end as well as later on in projects. Thank you to people who are putting their thoughts about digital learning in the chat. It's really interesting, I'm sure panel will agree, to see the variety of interpretations. And what's actually jumping out to me is how much it is almost emotion-led, people-led. It's not technology, it's VR, it's AR, it's whatever else. Actually, this is about what is the purpose of this, and this wonderful word of enhancing, which is a word that for any of you that joined us yesterday for the formal digital learning sort of became our buzzword of the day. It's actually, how does digital learning enhance whether the physical situation or that learning experience or whatever else it is. Karen's put a great question in to Dimitra, but I will open it up to other panelists afterwards because I think the point is valid right now. And actually, it's really a question about prioritization. So how do you prioritize, but particularly when we're thinking at the start of these projects, how do you pick what to do first? So Karen's question specifically is about prioritization in terms of your museum's website with regard to digital informal interaction / information for the public and to get the message out there. Dimitra, how has that experience been over sort of the last year for you?
That's a complicated question. It depends, because for every exhibition we work with, there's a different group of people. So it depends on the budget, first of all. What's the, I would translate it to mission for every exhibition. What is the interest, what is a focus group of target group of visitors that we work with? But when it comes to, we try to have a unified, in a sense, approach to exhibition. So we tried for every exhibition to have digital learning online, so people can access it from their home. The application that we designed is also accessible from home, so people do not need to come to the museum to listen to the stories or discover the collection. There is also a digitized collection that has been intensified the process the past years because, I guess, of the pandemic. So I don't know how we actually prioritize. I think it's a decision that is made when the team sits down. We identify, is this a need that the public has, and to what degree? We try to find ways that are meaningful for the public and to find more about the exhibitions, but also it's very challenging and maybe a bit difficult at times to provide multisensorial experiences that one would get if they're actually visiting the space with the art or the actual collection is. So it really depends on how things would go, but it's a long process, and that I forget how much time things take and how expensive sometimes it is.
And do you know what? And at that point, I thank you, and I thank the rest of panelists for being so open and transparent with us today. We say budget like it's a dirty word. It's a reality of the world that we work in. Budgets matter. Staffing resources level matter. And sometimes we are guided by, an external stakeholder, an external stakeholder, sometimes somebody who has a driving force that we just have to work within those parameters. And I think that's a good moment to then move us on to thinking about audience, because actually in this inception and design stage, it's really about understanding who is that audience or audiences, and how do we ensure at this stage of a digital learning life cycle that the offer is going to be relevant and useful for audiences. And I'm going to come to John first on that, thinking about some of those community works that you've been doing.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, audience is an interesting one for us because we are an artist-led organization. We create our own work. Audience is at the forefront, but because our work is heritage focused and put to the forefront those unheard voices from heritage, we also have a keen interest in representing different communities and telling their stories. So we create from those communities where we can. We did a project last year where we worked with Derby Theatre to create a project around by and for care experience young people. So our audience is our subject there as well. But it's difficult when you are sharing work in an online capacity, as we do. We have have our own targets for that, as well as sharing physically through headsets. All our work is designed to be viewed in headsets, but also to be viewed online as well through 360 videos. So, you know, we are Arts Council funded. We have to provide targets that we need to aim for. But that is quite different to our kind of community and our learning program, because that becomes more physical. It's about more physical engagement, more going out and sharing our work in the means that it's meant to be seen or designed to be seen in immersive headsets. But also, you know, we recognize the need for access to the equipment, to the resources, to be able to try things. We get great response from older audiences and participants, because this technology is something they've seen grow over time, but not necessarily got hands-on with, even though they are more likely to be able to afford the technology, which is quite interesting. But I think there's a confidence matter there, that you get to a certain age, and there's evidence and research to back this up, where your brain just decides that you don't want to learn anything new, and you just accept the kind of knowledge that you have. And I think that's where providing access to these soft touch learning experiences becomes quite exciting, especially for, like I said, for those who don't necessarily have the confidence or knowledge to start to kind of pick these up on their own.
I completely agree, and I think it's that idea of digital literacy and capabilities and skills and actually confidence at the heart of all that, which is as much for our audiences as it is probably for lots of us, you know, on conference today, feeling like those confidence levels ebb and flow. And, you know, as we all say, we are not experts, and we are certainly not experts in everything. And so when we have one of those generic digital things, digital is a massive word, and that covers a lot of things, and we can't possibly be experts or even have knowledge of every single facet of what that is. So thinking about audiences, Ben, let me come to you and ask that question again. So how do you ensure at this stage your offer is relevant and useful to audiences? You started to mention testing. I imagine there's a bit more on that to share.
Yes, I mean, certainly the bulk of the work I do, as I said, is for on-site exhibits. And when you're thinking about audiences for those sorts of digital learning experiences, one of the things I always try and drive home very quickly is it's not just children. Adult audiences are just as keen on interactive digital media as children are. It's also a quite strange audience, because in nearly every single case, when you observe people using on-site digital media exhibits, they're using them collaboratively with someone else. So you have a composite audience. It's two children, or an adult and a child, or two adults using it. So your audience has a very strong social element to it, and they will work together in order to solve problems, in order to work their way through the experience. One of the other things which becomes very apparent in those settings is that people will, if they possibly can, will try and ignore any instructions provided. And they will rely upon two main routes, either trial and error or copying what the last person did. And copying what the last person did can be a great strategy, provided the last person was doing what was supposed to happen. Unfortunately, what you're having to look out for are situations where most people are misunderstanding the exhibit, not using it as it was intended, and people just copy what the last person did and fall into exactly the same trap. So in order to ensure relevance and appeal and usability, you have to do really good, you have to do some prototype testing. And ideally that's prototype testing with partially functioning digital versions of the exhibit. You can do a little bit on paper, but really you have to be using the interfaces and at least a wireframe version of the digital media exhibit. I always allocate time to watch people at close quarters to see what they're doing. I am very careful not to intervene unless they are definitely stuck. But if they are stuck, intervene, move them on to the next bit so that they get the full experience. An awful lot of people will hit the first barrier and decide it's not for them and walk away. So you need to sort of carefully guide them through without over leading them, and then take them back and talk to them about what's been going on and why they were making the decisions that they were, and making it clear that it's not their fault if they don't know what to do. That I would always preface any prototype testing by saying, if you get stuck or if you find something confusing, that's our fault. That means that we have not designed this properly. We really want to hear about what you don't like as well as what you do, because they will imagine that you personally designed this exhibit and will become unreasonably upset if they're critical. So you need to prompt people to be critical of what they're experiencing and to explain where they found things to be difficult. And even testing with 10 or 15 people in a fairly rough and ready way will yield really valuable results. And I have seen museums literally save hundreds of thousands of pounds that would have been wasted on exhibits that were unusable had they not done that testing.
I mean, I'm completely with you there, Ben. Testing is so key. I'll share an anecdote that I actually ended up sharing yesterday, but it's as relevant to this point of the conversation too, which is you really don't understand how people use things until you try and do some testing on a website, ask them to search for something, and they go back to Google. That's your real indicator of how people think and do things. You can have the biggest search bar on a website in the world. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the way someone's going to engage with it. So actually, what we're getting, and what I can see from examples in the chat as well, is this reminder of how people focused everything is. So even if we aren't naturally jumping to audience focused, we have to throughout this design stage, because people will show us, quite rightly as you say, Ben, what works and more importantly what doesn't, at a point when we have some capacity, some budget, some resource to fix those problems.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of digital media learning, both online and on gallery. Sadly, I have also seen some horrific examples of things which are awful. And it's really sad because nobody means to do that, but it is surprisingly easy to get it wrong. Completely.
So anything else about audiences, Dimitra, that you want to share from those exhibitions in particular that you've been working on?
It's a bit funny and very interesting that today I'm sharing panel with Ben, because when I started my career in 2008 at the V&A, guess who I was working with? So everything that I've been developing the past, I don't know, almost 20 years, less than that, but everything I've been thinking about is related to what Ben has kindly shared with me during that time. So I have a lot of things that I agree with a lot of things that Ben says. What I think it's really different to what we do at the museum and how we ensure things are gonna, like, or money will be well spent, in a sense, is that we go against our worst enemy, and that is assumptions. Assumptions about what is maybe valuable for visitors, assumptions about how things would work in real life, about assumptions about how much time someone would use when they're using our interactive, low or high interactive solutions, assumptions about how our colleagues feel about having digital screens, for example, solutions in the galleries. So I think that one way to ensure that the audiences or our colleagues make most find what we offer relevant, it is going against our assumptions. We have multidisciplinary teams that work with every exhibition or every room, and that, in a sense, creates a sense of or a forum for disagreeing, and there is a lot of disagreement, and that is great. We believe in the value of that, and it's a great democracy in that. There are different attitudes held by different colleagues when it comes to what type of digital solutions might work. Do we need them in the gallery? So all these questions are very important to have them when you start thinking about would I spend time and resources in that? Would our our audiences find it useful. And when you have that question, then testing or evaluation comes very handy. Another thing that the museum has done, and that's how I came into contact with them in 2016, is that they have an established relationship with one of the local universities. So despite being alone in the bubble, they're trying to reach out and have share knowledge and gain knowledge from through partnerships. And this long-term relationship with the university has created a lot of digital solutions, a lot of testing, and it has also, in a sense, both benefit the research community, but the research community has also benefit the work that we've done at the museum. So I would say that we ensure what is, if something is there, but we don't ensure it 100%. We're working with it. We're collecting data already. We already collected data in autumn. We're going to collect data again soon. So we spend time in the gallery observing people, hearing how they feel about it, seeing how they use it, and we try to maybe make changes. But also the collaboration with the local university allows us to maybe test things that we wouldn't have the ability to test before, because there's a different budget coming in. And I would say budget again, because it's really, really useful to have, in a sense, resources like researchers or students coming in and helping us seeing the work we're doing with different eyes. We currently have 2 students doing their internship at us, and the way they see the things we have done and the solutions we chose to implement allows us to move a bit forward. So we are not afraid of criticism. We're not afraid to challenge our assumptions. And I think that's in complementing the process of testing that is also very valuable.
Not afraid to challenge our assumptions. What a line to live by. I'm definitely adding that. I've got a little book going of the great things that I hear from colleagues in the sector. We had a great one yesterday that I'll share for anyone that wasn't there, which is when you're thinking about testing evaluations, there's a difference between lessons learnt and lessons identified. If you don't do anything with those lessons, they are just lessons identified. They are not lessons learnt. So I'll leave you that nugget to ponder over. Aaron, last but not least, to you on this thought about how do you ensure that at this stage of your offer? Yes.
I'm really sorry to butt in. I just wanted to add one thing to that last question.
Go for it.
Which is, because I think we spoke a lot about technology, and I think as someone who's not very technological, some of that was quite intimidating for me to think, and we have done a lot of user testing. We've interviewed a lot of people who've used our website before, but I would just like to remind people as well as people who work in learning that it's also about knowing your audience, and it's all of those skills that we use all the time, thinking about what language are we using, how are we engaging people, what are the methods that an under 5 will want to use and a 17-year-old will want to use. What is someone who might have additional learning needs? How are they going to engage with it? How can you be sensory within the context of digital? I think all of those things are still present, and I don't want anyone to go away thinking that everything is about technology, although technology is so important. But I think it is also important to remember that we do know our audiences, and to think about who is contributing to creating that work is the people who know the audiences that they will be delivered to in the end.
Amazing. Thank you for that point. You feel free to interrupt me. That's absolutely no problem when you're adding that sort of brilliant insight. And I imagine that sort of resonates with a lot of people that we've got here today on conference. Digital is one of those things, and we experience it a lot where, oh, we love some lingo, don't we? We'll really go for some terms if we get one and we hook onto it. And it's that reminder across conference that people have that different level of understanding. I'm going to ask one of those questions, which is not meant to catch anyone out. It's not meant to be, you know, this is a problem. This means I did my job badly. But one of those things that just feels very real in what we do. And so I'm asking the question of what's the one thing you often forget about when you design a new digital learning offer? What's that thing that slips your mind? It's the last thing that comes to it. Something that you can then pass on to conference as make sure that's on your checklist. And I will come to Ben first on that one.
Don't overload it with content. It's got to be fun. if you're on the content side of it, even if you're not an expert, you rapidly fall in love with the content, and you're so in love with that content, you want to share that content with everyone, and you want to share all of it. And actually, what you've got to, the discipline you've got to set yourself is you need an exhibit to do one thing really well and make one point really powerfully, not 15 badly. And if I'm honest, there have been a couple of exhibits that I have, as a content lead role rather than the audience advocate role, a couple of exhibits that I wrecked by overpacking it with content, and it slows it down, and it slows the gameplay down, it slows the experience down. There's too much text, it's too confusing. So you've really got to focus in on what this experience is going to be, particularly for an on-site digital media exhibit, because the dwell time will be between 3 and 5 minutes, length of a pop song.
Exactly, and that point really picks up on what Aaron was just talking about, is really knowing your audience. And it's that thing we have to remember, particularly with on-site digital learning experience, is it matters that they're standing up, it matters that they're carrying a heavy bag, it matters that they're thinking about X, Y, and Z. If you're doing a bring your own device BYOD thing, it matters how much charge they've got on their phone, what other notifications are popping up. All these things are constantly going on. We don't create digital learning in isolation at all. Dimitra, the same question to you. What's the one thing you often forget about when designing a digital learning offer?
That's a hard question, because I have to find one thing. I would say that assumptions, again, about what people need or want to see or want to hear, want to experience is the thing that I am kind of like constantly challenging, but not everybody does. So it's, as Ben says, it's really easy to just get in love with what your idea or like your the content you create, and then just get focused and just deliver, and then there's nobody really who enjoys that. So I would say that the many assumptions we maybe take when we are so involved and invested in this process, I would say.
Completely, and the thing that we're thinking about today with informal digital learning, which was so different to yesterday, and I will stop talking about it, but it's only because there's those moments are popping around in my mind, is actually this isn't about acquiring a specific skill. This isn't goal orientated. This is the development of learning. This is a gathering of knowledge and experience, whatever we are trying to do. And so actually it really matters that people do enjoy it, and they have, enjoyment is not a dirty word. We can still learn and engage and enjoy ourselves at the same time. Aaron, I'll come to you next with what's the one thing you often forget about when designing a new learning offer?
Well, Dimitra has actually already said it, and it's that just how long it takes. It takes much longer than you think. And that's not just to produce whatever it is you're producing, it's to deal with all of the stuff that has to go around it, to support that as well. So at the moment, we're developing a sort of online, it's almost a TV show of short episodes to do with coronation, called Coronation Club. And to support that, we're also creating a document that will have all of the activities in it, anything where we mention, or you could try this. We're supplying information to help the adults who'll be supporting the children, engaging with that to basically lead that activity separately. And that takes a lot of time as well. So filming takes a long time, writing scripts takes a long time, getting people to check it. Everyone who's invested in it has to be checking things so that you're getting the tone right, that the facts are correct. Because once something's up, to change it is so much harder. So you've got to get it right the first time, really. So my thing was just how long everything takes to get something right the first time is really, really important. But because Dimitra said it already, my other thing is, how do you get it in front of your audience, the audience that you want it to be in front of? And actually, David Hughes from Chester Zoo has already mentioned this in the chat about our work being siloed away. So that's why we embed all of our stuff through YouTube. So it is available to a wider audience. But I think there's so many challenges around you create something, and then how do you get it in front of the eyes, into the hands of the people that you want to be using it? I think that's a huge challenge, and it's one of the things that takes up some of that time. And if it is video content, a huge thing that we've learned recently is just how you name your content, which is really obvious, but we're trying to brand everything. So it's, you know, Westminster Abbey, Weekend Wonders, #, and then the title of the video. But by that time, no one's looking at it. So we've just taken all that stuff off the front. And the first time we did that was with a video called "What is a Jubilee?" around the Platinum Jubilee. And that video got, it's at nearly 7,000 views, which was almost 10 times what our other videos were getting. So I think it's a real lesson for us, is to, like Ben is saying, it's saying what it is and letting it do one thing, and being really clear about what it is you're doing. And with our visuals as well, being really clear who the audience is that it's for. When it's "What is a Jubilee?" there's an illustration of a crown to say to people, this is for children, to tell children what a Jubilee is. But I think we also have to be careful when things are on YouTube, that we're not taking big views to mean that we've necessarily succeeded at getting it in front of the right audience. So for example, we made a video about our organ for children, and what that means is that it's a really accessible video about how the organ works and how it's used. And so it's had over 11,000 views, and I'm quite sure that's not 11,000 children, but what it means is that it's reaching a wider audience than the intended audience. So that for us is great, but it also means we're not quite sure how to measure how successful that is in terms of it reaching the intended audience.
Completely. I can see lots of questions coming in the chat. Please do add your questions. I'm going to jump onto those in a second. I will just go to John finally on this question about the one thing you often forget when designing a new digital offer, and then I'll jump into the chat and answer conferences questions. Over to you, John.
I think that the panelists have already kind of answered what I would have jumped to. One of the things that I think can be a hindrance is when you are working in an accessible, collaborative way, is sometimes you forget that you actually need to be quite prescriptive and say what's happening when, trying to attract an audience when it's, you give the audience too much agency, it can just become a barrier to engaging with them. So, people like information, they like to know when and how and where. And I think that's really important. And the other thing I think, that might have already been mentioned, but it's kind of where the engagement happens within your strategy. What does it look like? I fall short of this all the time, where I have an exciting conversation with somebody, or there's an opportunity to take something up, especially when there's funding involved, but then not relating it back to that strategy and how you're kind of managing your resources and time as an organization. I think sometimes you can get run away with the excitement.
Completely. I definitely have had that feeling before. There's a really great question from Helen, and I will let panelists put up their hand if they want to answer this, and we can take multiple answers. We've got a bit of time, but I think relevant to any of us, because actually producing a new thing, whatever scale of that new thing is for a new audience, can feel big and scary and sometimes risky, and it's that budget word again that we have been dancing around. Are there ways that you can mitigate that risk if you don't have a lot of room to fail? Anyone want to take that? John, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, I'll just kind of quickly jump into that. I think if you, especially with a lot of money involved, that's not normally coming from a core budget. That's normally going to be something that you're fundraising for. And at that fundraising point is where you're going to be thinking about those risks, because funders don't want to fund things that are going to fail, that are going to cost too much money, that are going to run over time. So you're already thinking about those risks at that point of the project. And it could be time related, it could be finance related, but if you're not doing it there, you're not going to get funded. So it's about where you start thinking about those risks. And we can't future predict all the risks that would be there as a project, but certainly the kind of big immediate ones will be at that point in your project.
Wonderful. Ben, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, repeating what I said earlier, prototype testing has to be a big part of risk management, because getting to see people actually using a partially working version of whatever it is you're developing is really important, and that will genuinely flush out a lot of the problems. I would recommend, when you commission a piece of a digital learning resource, that you build in prototypes as one of the deliverables, and that you tie payments to those deliverables, so people understand you genuinely want them, and you will expect them to be delivered on time and to a required standard. And I think it's really important to write a clear design brief at the beginning of the project that sets out your aspirations, your target audience, what you understand to be the challenges that the developer needs to produce. If people are interested, I've got template versions of those exhibit design briefs, which I can share. But it's worth putting in the time and effort to do that planning. If nothing else, writing a design brief means that everybody on the team hopefully has a shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve.
That would be great if you can share those, Ben. I think that would be really useful for people to have that sort of practical tool to use, particularly when we're thinking about what John was talking about, of converting that very exciting idea into something that you're then going to move forward with. Dimitra, to you.
I'm just going to clinch on the wording of that question, because it says a new audience, right? So my starting point would be, what type of audience is this? What do I know about this audience? Do I know nothing? What is my starting point? Do I have any data on that? Any on the preferences, on who they are, what they like, what they do? So I would start from that, reading maybe some literature on that, if that exists. Checking data from my organization about this audience, about this new audience, and then seeing, do I have to start from scratch, or is there a background below that I can stand on and work with this? And that kind of like allows me to, I'm not pretending I know everything about the new audience, but I can maybe know or get to know some of their preferences. And that is part of the evaluation that starts very early on, and then of course get in touch with them and get to know them. The result wouldn't be one that fits everybody. Nothing fits all, right? But if it allows or addresses the majority, then I think you do a good job. And another thing that I find quite interesting is that most of the times the variation when it comes to both the digital solutions we use, so the technology, I would say, but also the content or the way we present it is key to a success. Even when we talk to the same audiences, you get a bit bored if you see the same. If you watch different films that follow the same plot or have the same actor, so you need the variation. So variation also is a thing that I would take with me as a starting point when I'm going out to reach new audiences. Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I think it's such a good point, and something we can often forget. We don't start with a blank slate. And even if it's a new audience for your organization, it's probably not a new audience for somebody else. I am going to say this as a chair of a network. There are networks out of there. There are organizations out of there. There are other people. I'm going to say a sentence, but I'm scared my inbox will be flooded. I will answer any email. I will pick up any phone call from any friendly person in the sector who just wants to pick my brains. And I do that because I've got plenty of people out there that I do exactly the same to. Remember, we are each other's friends, and arguably critical friends at that moment you need them. So it's something to think about. Let's have a look at questions. There's a great one here from David. Ben, I can see you've answered it, and I don't know if you want to add any more to that, and I'll say to panel as well, about examples of bringing in an audience to work within a consultative or co-creative way on a project. How did you get the audience involved to create an output? Ben, do you want to expand on your comment first?
Sure. The comment I made was about being super clear from the start as to what their role will be. Any co-creation community work you do, you have to be really honest with people about how much influence they have. That comes from a brilliant set of work that Bernadette Lynch did in a report for the Paul Hamlin Foundation called Whose Cake Is It Anyway?, where they did some very in-depth, candid feedback from co-creation projects. And a lot of people ended up being really angry about feeling that they'd been misled as to what their role would be. There's a couple of follow-on reports from there which provide some really excellent practical advice about setting up any co-creation project, called No Longer Us and Them. They're all available for free on the Paul Hamlin Foundation website, and I'll put a link up to it in a minute.
Amazing. Anyone else want to jump in on those collaborative co-creation type projects? John, I thought you might. Go on.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is building that trust with that audience and accepting when your role is not needed. You know, there's a lot of examples of organizations and artists and practitioners who go into communities because they got funding to do something, so they have to do it. But actually, that community is fine on its own. They're doing their own thing. They're happy with how they're doing things. There was some great work. I forget the person's name. I've got a book by them right here, actually. It was I'll post it in the chat. I'll find it in a second. But they did a lot of work around community participation in European culture centres, and those culture centres weren't arts organisations. They were community halls and kind of town spaces, and it was where those co-creative, collaborative things were happening and existing on their own without any intervention. And sometimes we have to just look at that and reflect on it. And ask ourselves whether what we want to do is actually needed, or can we support in another way. The other thing is look at when you're actually engaging with those people and you've got them on board and you're working on a co-creative project, use different methods of consultation. Look at different ways you can do that, whether that's kind of icebreaker kind of activities, whether it's straightforward questions, whether it's in a group setting, whether it's one-to-one. I was doing a piece of consultation recently with some young people around how they want to engage with us as an organization, what they want to do. And I found that talking to a group of 14, 15-year-olds was not working. So I quickly put together a jam board with the questions I wanted to ask, and we sat down, we still did it as a group, but they were able to answer on a more personal, individual level, and almost kind of behind a screen, even though we were still in the same space. So I just kind of think that having different methods of consultation, you'll get different responses and provide better access.
Brilliant. Dimitra.
It's not about digital at all, but currently I'm working since January. I've been working with a group of 5 teenagers coming from different neighborhoods here in Oslo. And the point of all this intervention, I would say, first time in my life I'm doing it, is actually make this team of people, first of all, feel welcome and make them feel that the museum is a place for them. But also straight from the beginning, I was like, I would like to give the control to you. So despite me working with the exhibition, I invited the team of 5 teenagers to come to the exhibition and interpret it in their own ways, and invite other teenagers to different events. So currently we have 2 events to present their points and their interpretation. What I find extremely hard the first time when I was with them in the exhibition was like letting things go wrong. I felt like my bones and my body was hurting sometimes when they're saying things that were not correct. But then I somehow got out of it because I said to myself, Dimitra, that's not the point. If they wanted to hear the whole story, they would come and have a tour with you or some other of my colleagues. But the point here is to allow this team of teenagers to come and so to their peers that the museum welcomes all kind of interpretations, and that art is not really like fast food in a sense, or like food made, pre-made food for you. So that I found a bit hard. And although I was kind of honest at the beginning of through the whole process, I was not honest with myself. And that moment, I think I'm going to remember it for the whole of my life, because it was like physically pain of letting things go wrong, right? Giving the control, giving the piece of cake to them and say, do whatever you want with this. And yesterday we had a ceramic workshop inspired by the exhibition, and I saw them creating things inspired by the vases in the exhibition and talking about the art and doing things. But then I kept wondering why we have a tendency of inviting communities in, but actually when presenting their work, we take them out of the exhibition space, of the official space. So a lot of things that these communities bring to us takes place in I would say behind the scenes, but it's not really behind the scenes. Like it would be a workshop place, or it would be a room. But I would like to be more inviting and have them maybe more interventing in a way permanently in the work I do. Because if you come to the exhibition, it's a clean white exhibition that we have curated, and these interventions are staying a bit away, or they're very temporary. So I would say it depends really on what you can't do and what you want or what you don't want to do. But I think we still struggle a little bit with letting people in and doing things in the official space of the museum.